Hi, welcome back. It's Anna
and Rose
coming to you from the Mystery Parlor. Today's episode, we are going to talk about premonitions.
A premonition is defined as a strong feeling that something is about to happen, especially something unpleasant. People who frequently have premonitions are sometimes called precognitive empaths. It's believed precognitive empaths can have premonitions while awake or asleep, sometimes coming to them spontaneously or when they intentionally tune in. We're going to sprinkle some first-hand accounts in with some historical ones that may surprise you.
If you could use this power today at will, what would you do? Know the winning lottery numbers? Prevent a catastrophe? Find a missing person? A skeptic or realist might say premonitions are simply an observance of patterns with predictable outcomes. Maybe. But then we'd like to know how to turn that on and off. Let's start with something people are familiar with, the weather. We were wondering how the Old Farmer's Almanac compares with the science of meteorology for predicting the weather.
The Old Farmer's Almanac predicts the weather a year or two in advance using an exclusive mathematical and astronomical formula that relies on sunspot activity, tidal action, planetary position, and other factors. If you check out the weather like us on your phone, it's 80% accurate for the 7-day forecast and 90% accurate for the 5-day forecast. But if you are looking out 10 days or more, the accuracy falls to 50% or less. The Old Farmer's Almanac has been historically 80% accurate overall. Last year, the 2022 to 2023 winter was a bit lower at 70% accurate. Still not bad for predicting the forecast a year or two ahead of time.
Religion is another popular area of prediction and prophecy. Unfortunately, these long-studied subjects have controversies and points of contention between differing opinions.
Next up is Mark Twain, best known for his classic novels, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn.
Mark Twain predicted his own death in 1909. He was quoted by his biographer, Albert Bigelow Paine, saying, "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said no doubt. Now here are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together, they must go out together." The day after Halley's Comet appeared in the sky, Mark Twain passed away from a heart attack. That was April 21st, 1910, a year after he had made the prediction.
Here's the story of Bill. He was a young, carefree bachelor who drank a lot of beer, basically living his best life without any responsibilities. One of the jobs he worked on was developing a smokeless furnace for use at a local pallet manufacturer. The furnace was built as a separate building behind the warehouse. They planned to run the furnace with faulty pallets in order to heat the large manufacturing warehouse.
When the furnace was in the testing phase, Bill's job was to start it each morning. One morning, the pile of pallets was wet from melting snow. Bill filled the furnace with the wet wood and poured a little gasoline on the wood as an igniter. He then went inside the main building where the switch was located to turn on the fans inside the furnace. With the help of the fans, some of the gasoline became a vapor, which is highly flammable. At this point in the story, Bill reminded us that at the time of this incident, he was young, carefree, and felt invincible. He lit a torch before he even got to the open furnace door. All he remembers is a big puff of air, and then he found himself on the ground, 10 to 20 feet away from the furnace. The door of the furnace had been completely blown off and was laying on the ground near him.
Bill's face felt warm, but he was not in any pain. He got up and walked straight to his toolbox and instinctively put Sylvadine cream on. The Sylvadine cream he had just purchased on a whim at the drugstore. This was a guy who didn't even have an aspirin or Band-Aid to his name. After applying the cream, Bill walked into the pallet business to tell someone what had happened. The first person he came across started yelling for help and to call 911. The blast had burned the skin on Bill's face and hairline. His shirt had even shrunk several sizes due to the extreme heat.
Bill was diagnosed with deep second-degree burns on his face. The doctors believe his quick use of Sylvadine cream helped him by possibly preventing infection. He did not develop any long-term scarring or issues related to the incident. Bill doesn't know what compelled him to purchase the Sylvadine cream, but he is glad he listened to his intuition.
Here is a Nikola Tesla prediction from the early 1900s. When we were looking up Tesla's accomplishments, it was obvious he was a great scientist and inventor. One of his inventions we use all the time is the remote control, which was demonstrated to the public in 1898.
In 1909, the same year Mark Twain predicted his own death, Tesla's prediction went like this: it will soon be possible to transmit wireless messages all over the world so simply that an individual can own and operate his own apparatus.
Sounds like Wi-Fi and cell phones to me.
Then, in 1929, Tesla stated, when wireless technology is perfectly applied, the whole earth will be converged into a huge brain. We shall be able to communicate with one another instantly, irrespective of distance.
And that would be the internet as we know it.
Now back to modern times. Patty is a 20-something who was about to be married when this unsettling event took place. Patty had been busy planning a big wedding with many bridesmaids and groomsmen. Lots of family and friends would be in attendance.
The week before the wedding, Patty's family had a quaint dinner that included her parents, grandparents, and siblings, plus one great aunt. At this small get-together, Patty's grandmother brought Patty her wedding gift. She said not to open it until after the wedding. Patty asked her why she brought it this evening instead of bringing it to the wedding. Her grandmother remarked, "I want to make sure you get this, even if I can't make it there." The comment caught Patty off guard. She asked her grandmother if she was all right and what would stop her from coming. Her grandmother assured Patty she was fine and said something like, "You never know what could happen with the weather and such." This conversation was all but forgotten as Patty was tending to last-minute details for the wedding, making sure everything was perfect for her special day.
The day of the wedding was a whirlwind. Patty was a ball of nerves before and during the ceremony, and it all happened so fast. There were so many people and all eyes on her. What she didn't realize was that there were a few people missing. It turns out her grandmother may have known her time was near. She had suffered a heart attack on the way to the wedding and passed away.
Though it was tragic, Patty's friends and family put their grief on hold and helped her to create some happy memories during the reception. Patty is glad her grandma brought her gift early, and it makes her smile knowing that her grandma was at peace with whatever was to come.
It's hard to talk about premonitions or predictions without bringing up Nostradamus. Nostradamus lived in the 1500s. His writings are hard to understand, similar to Shakespeare. Nostradamus died when Shakespeare was 2 years old. Warning, we were super confused when we read this for the first time, and the second time also. Here we go. It's about the assassination of JFK. Nostradamus's prediction went like this: the ancient task will be completed. From on high, evil will fall the great man. The dead innocent will be accused of the deed. The guilty unwell remain in the mist.
Let's break it down. First, he said, the ancient task will be completed. We'll take that as a murder.
Then we have, from on high, evil will fall on the great man. This is explained as the shooter was thought to be on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. That would explain on high, and evil did fall on the great man. JFK was the one killed, and he was considered by many to be a great man.
Next line. A dead innocent will be accused of the deed. Lee Harvey Oswald was accused of killing JFK, but he claimed to be innocent. He said he was being used as a patsy. In other words, was being blamed. Here's how Lee Harvey Oswald ended up in police custody 45 minutes after the assassination of JFK. A police officer was shot and killed. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested for killing the police officer, then quickly accused of assassinating JFK. He claimed he did not shoot anybody. 2 days later, Lee Harvey Oswald was shot and killed on live television while in police custody by shooter Jack Ruby, a local nightclub owner.
The last line reads, "The guilty unwell remain in the mist." We still don't know for certain who planned and killed JFK, and it seems they have remained well and hidden in what Nostradamus called the mist. There are so many conspiracy theories about this topic. The possibilities are endless.
We feel like we need to read this one again, and maybe it'll make more sense now. The ancient task will be completed. From on high, evil will fall on the great man. The dead innocent will be accused of the deed. The guilty unwell remain in the mist.
We have another premonition about a president. This time, the president himself had the premonition in the form of a dream. It took place a few nights before the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln.
In the dream, Lincoln walked into the east room of the White House and found a covered corpse being guarded. He proceeded to ask who had died and was told, "An assassin killed the president." He shared his dream with his wife and at least one other. A few days later, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth.
Here is a short story of something that happened when I was 10 years old. I had an Aunt Flo who was as sweet as can be. She was actually my grandmother's aunt, so that makes her my great-great aunt. I was telling Rose the story of how I was afraid to visit my grandparents because my Aunt Flo lived with them, and I was afraid she would die while we were there. And she did. While Aunt Flo and I were watching television together, she passed away in her chair due to an aneurysm. At the time, I thought it was my fault because I had feared it was going to happen while we were visiting her. As I grew up, I told myself that I was afraid of her dying because she was the oldest person I knew.
When Anna was telling me about this, I asked her if she knew any other really old people at the time, and she rattled off a list of them. Then I asked her if she was ever afraid they would pass away while together, and Anna replied, "Nope, just Aunt Flo."
And that's the first time I realized maybe it was an actual premonition. I had another unusual thing happen around the same time while in elementary school, but first, a story about the Titanic.
14 years before the Titanic tragedy, a book named Futility was published in 1898. The author was Morgan Robinson. Morgan's previous career was working on ships, so he was very familiar with the inner workings, even having been promoted to first mate at some point. The name of the book was changed to The Wreck of the Titan in 1912, the same year the Titanic sank. The similarities are eerie. Both the Titan and the Titanic hit an iceberg and sank. Both ships were the largest passenger ships of their time and considered unsinkable. Lastly, the lack of lifeboats caused an incredible loss of life in both accounts. The author claimed it was not a prediction, just a coincidence. But what do you think?
Now about my elementary school special reading program that may have been a part of a telepathic or astral projection study while reading the book A Wrinkle in Time.
If you haven't read A Wrinkle in Time, it was made into a Disney movie in 2018. It's about conformity and good versus evil, plus using another dimension to tap into the time and space of our universe, beyond our understanding, and to expand our thinking.
This was the late 70s. A small group of classmates were chosen to participate in an experiment. We went to a room in the library that had cots to lay down on. It was a windowless room with carpet on the floors, walls, and ceiling. The lights would be turned off, the door closed. Then we were told to try and astral project. I would sometimes nap and dream, but I can't remember actually leaving my body. We were instructed to try this when going to sleep at night as well. We moved away and switched schools during this time, so I don't know how the program ended.
We haven't heard of any other elementary schools doing this, especially today.
Like I said, it was the 70s. That's the only explanation I have. Our next few topics happened or started around the same time.
Recently, a popular podcast, The Sean Ryan Show, interviewed Joe McMoneagle. Joe is a retired U.S. Army Chief Warrant Officer, serving our country all over the world, including when he served in the Vietnam War. The podcast was over 6 hours long and was worth the listen, in our opinion.
An interesting thing about Joe is he was one of the first remote viewers recruited by the U.S. government for classified projects. What is a remote viewer? Basically a psychic, a trained one, that is.
The government program started with the name Grill Flame and has changed names numerous times since. Anytime it was publicly referenced, once by a president, other times by prominent government officials, it was given a new name. Some of the popular names have been Stargate, Center Lane, and Gondola Wish.
If you are wondering who uses these programs, think CIA, DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, NSA, FBI, NASA, and the White House. Even though the agencies won't admit to it, the program has been funded by the U.S. government for decades.
These trained remote viewers were able to be extremely specific and detailed in their reports for the government. Here is an example of one of Joe McMoneagle's targets.
Joe, along with another remote viewer, were tasked to figure out what was being built inside the largest building in Russia. The remote viewers did this from separate locations and never spoke about what they were working on. It turns out both remote viewers gave the same details in their reports.
They discovered that it was a large submarine, 30 to 33 feet shy of the length of a carrier ship and 70 feet wide. It was made to carry ICBMs. We had to look up the meaning of ICBMs. They are intercontinental ballistic missiles and have a 3,400 plus mile range. While remote viewing, they also discovered that the sub had slanted launch tubes, which was considered new technology at the time. The old style was straight up and down and could only be launched at a stop or a very slow pace. This new slanted design would allow for a launch while on the move.
The report was sent to the National Security Council, who called it a fantasy, because the building was not connected to a harbor to launch a sub. The National Security Council thought the remote viewers had it wrong. When Joe was told they were denying his report, he insisted that the original report was correct and added that the sub would be launched in 112 days. The National Security Council ordered aerial photos of the area taken 114 days later. These photos showed a trench dug from the building to the nearby harbor. They also showed the first known TK089 sub parked next to a carrier that was approximately 30 to 33 feet longer than the sub, exactly as the remote viewers reported.
They were spot on, and this is one example of why remote viewers are in high demand and are held in high regard, privately. One attempt on Joe's life happened in a public place, most likely by a 2-stage poison. His heart stopped for a length of time and he was presumed dead. Who did it? We don't know. But what we do know is that the U.S. government had a mock funeral for him, so the assailants would think he was dead. If the government would go that far to protect Joe as an asset, there must be some truth and value to remote viewing.
Joe was primarily taught remote viewing by Bob Monroe. Bob started the Monroe Institute in the early 1970s as an educational and research organization. Rose and I really want to go to the remote viewing program at the Monroe Institute. If you've been through this program, please email us about your experience. We'd love to hear about it. If you want to donate towards our trip, you can buy us a coffee using the link in the description. Technically, a donation of $5,190 will cover the cost of our class that lasts 5 to 6 days. Afterwards, we would offer you an exclusive Zoom meeting to share the results of our adventure.
We must not be the only ones interested in learning more about this subject. While researching remote viewing, we found an article from Northwestern University that made reference to 26 different studies published between 1978 and 2010. It was considered a phenomenon of presentiment or sensing the future.
They called it a phenomenon of anomalous, can't be explained, anticipatory, seems to predict without known cause or clues, activity, creates changes in the cardiopulmonary, skin, and nervous systems, concluding that it did occur, but they did not have an understanding of how, but felt discoveries in the quantum biological field could potentially make sense.
There is also an Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS for short. It was founded by Dr. Edgar Mitchell, an Apollo 14 astronaut. He felt a profound sense of universal connectedness returning to Earth from the moon. He started IONS to find the science behind this. One study they are doing is to look for DNA gene expressions for psychic abilities. They have found a connection and are looking into if it can be turned on or off.
So basically, there are a lot of people looking further into premonitions and predictions. As of today, we can conclude they absolutely happen, but we don't yet know why. Hopefully, science will have and be willing to share more answers soon. Starting with Rose, here are our final thoughts on this subject.
I do not consider myself to be a person who has a lot of premonitions or predictions, but I do have gut feelings sometimes. In the past, I've trusted and listened to them. Gut feelings are also called your intuition, which is something that has always intrigued me and something I hope to develop more. Considering the research we have done for this episode, I would explain premonitions as future feelings and intuition as present feelings. Though I believe the two are connected, I think they're distinct from one another. Maybe when I'm working on developing my intuition, I'll have a premonition or two to share with you.
I think of premonitions sometimes as intuition, or, like you said, Rose, a gut feeling. Sometimes I feel very tuned in and know things ahead of time. For example, simple things like clues for the Wordle word of the day. The problem is I don't know how to turn it on. It just randomly happens. As a mom, wife, and having pets, I feel like we can read what will happen next. sometimes even with strangers or acquaintances. I also feel the universe is trying to tell us things sometimes, but we don't hear it until it's too late. Or maybe we are better off not knowing it at all. We are so busy and so much information is coming at us all the time that sometimes we miss the obvious. So when you feel prompted, take the picture, give the hug, say I love you.
And since we are still brand spanking new to this realm of podcasting, if you have a mystical, obscure, paranormal, or an out-of-this-world story we need to share, our email is open. We promise to read and respond to each and every one of your stories.
We have recently created a page on a website called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can support us by giving us a one-time donation or subscribing to us for exclusive content. You can find this using the link in the description.
Your support will help us with things like upgrading our equipment, planning on-site episodes, arranging for guest speakers, and releasing more frequent episodes.
You can also find us on Instagram using the link in the description.
Thanks for listening.
Bye for now.